What's everyone's favorite turn-based RPG with sun and moon theming? That's right, Pokemon Gen 7. But for real, this video is about Sea of Stars, an indie RPG by Sabotage Studio, released in 2023. Sea of Stars? More like Sea of Good. But why? Look at this, you have a boat and you fight enemies in the overworld, and they turn red when you kill them. Literally Chrono Trigger, and Chrono Trigger is good. Oh, you think it's good because of the combat? It has button timings, literally Paper Mario. No, that's silly. It's true that Sabotage make games with the intent of modernizing retro titles they are inspired by. But Sea of Stars is a great game because of its own original ideas, not its connection to other games. Here's why. Just a note, I played most of my first playthrough on default settings and then I used the Dubious Dare and the Tactician's Metal difficulty increases for my second playthrough. Now on to the review. Starting with the mechanics, most turn-based games have one or two defining elements, but Sea of Stars stands out using many mechanics. Though if any of them are Sea of Stars' defining trait, it's locks. When enemies are going to act, they have visible timers, and if they're going to use a skill, they form a lock comprised of multiple damage types that you can hit to cancel the action. With all the options you're given, this opens the door for a lot of tactical decisions, whether you're going to break the lock, which ones to break, how you're going to break them, etc. Locks can sometimes act like a mini puzzle in combat, challenging your knowledge of the mechanics to see whether you can break them. The fact that there are many locks that normal enemies might form and many combinations of these different locks means that encounters rarely play out the same to each other. Each battle is a unique experience, unlike in some games where if you've seen a particular encounter before, you can just use the same strategy you've previously used. Thus, locks make combat fresh and interesting for every turn they're active. It's also worth noting that Sea of Stars has a fairly unique handling of attack types. There are two types of physical attack, Blunt and Slash, and originally two magic types, Sun and Moon, as well as a couple more added throughout the game. Whilst making the game aesthetically stand out, this helps the gameplay too. You get the main four types right from the start of the game, and you use them all equally to break locks. Particularly the distinction of these two physical types creates variation in the ways that you can use your normal attack, one of the many reasons that normal attacks are actually interesting in this game. This is how you make a tactically interesting combat system. Secondly, MP in Sea of Stars is unique. MP pools are very small, even at the end of the game, but you gain 3 MP when you do a normal attack. This system is put in place to counteract the playstyles that many older RPGs encourage, spamming normal attacks and never using skills in order to conserve MP, then spamming higher MP cost skills against bosses. Sabotage's design philosophy of modernizing and fixing the mistakes of older games is very clear here. The game itself actively makes fun of such games through the somewhat fourth wall breaking your land. The system Sea of Stars uses encourages you to frequently use all your skills in normal encounters, as well as manage MP carefully for bosses. Normal attacks get even more interesting when you factor in live mana. Using normal attacks spawns live mana which can be used to boost your attacks and imbue them with an element specific to that character. It's somewhat Octopath-esque. The fact that normal attacks can be used to either spawn live mana or break a lock of a certain element using live mana, combined with the MP system and the distinction of physical types, further make normal attacks a tactically interesting decision. The number of ways you can approach battles increases with combos.
Prepare for trouble!
Make it double!
You build up a meter, then you can select a combo between 2 party members to use. Essentially, this is a good mechanic for simple reasons. More options in combat, and some of these combos have quite interesting effects. The number you can unlock is also quite high, increasing your choice of actions, something that Sea of Stars really needs, and getting extra skills for finding secrets is a nice reward. Those are all effectively types of actions you can take, but Sea of Stars has some fundamental differences in how turn order works compared to other games. You control only 3 party members at a time, but they can act in any order you want, and after you get your 4th, you can even swap them out as a free action, as in you can swap and then act in the same action. Additionally, revival happens automatically after a few turns. Are these effects really OP? Yes, but they're also really fun, and the reason that you can only control 3 party members at a time. The fact that swapping people out doesn't cost anything means you can and will use the entire party always instead of just picking the best 3 to use. changing your turn order mid-battle instead of it being decided before battle or being determined by speed adds a further layer to the tactics of the game. To destroy locks, you need to keep in mind who you want to act first to affect things like live mana, and then you need to select your turn order relative to the timing of enemy actions too. A neat little bonus aspect is the battle takes place right in the overworld in Sea of Stars, reminiscent of Chrono Trigger, but something interesting gameplay-wise is that positioning has an effect on AoE effects and the like. This is more impactful when you get a certain skill partway through the game that pulls enemies all into the same space. It's the only positioning affecting skill that's really worth using and makes the positioning aspect of combat add more nuance to the game. The final combat mechanic I would like to mention is timing. Instead of missing based on RNG, Sea of Stars lets you time your attacks and blocks to add a little something extra to the essence of the game. The real quality of the combat still comes from the tactical aspect like most turn-based games, but this is still nice to have. It's particularly enjoyable when using Moonerang, which allows you to continue hitting the enemy more times ad infinitum if you keep up with the timing. It wouldn't be a Sea of Stars review without an excessively long Moonerang clip. The skill in particular makes the timing really fun, because instead of just a slight bonus, every timing is another hit, giving your timing a more important connection to the outcome of the skill, and you can do a heck of a lot of hits. When it starts getting really fast, it gets quite intense and pretty epic. Oh, and also, are you enjoying the video? No? It sucks? Then hit that dislike button, coward. The like or the dislike. Don't be a fence sitter. Hit one of them. Like the vid, subscribe. Don't like the vid, leave a hate comment. Not even kidding, if this video doesn't feel liking, then tell me why. And then there's every other aspect of the combat system. Regarding enemy design, enemy locks in general test your ability to utilize the mechanics presented to you. Particularly in boss fights, as you progress through the game, mastery of more mechanics is expected. Later into the game, I found boss locks to expect utilization of things like turn-delaying tactics and use of ultimate skills more. But also, turn-delaying skills are really fun in Sea of Stars because they allow for alternate strategies. There are some locks that seem like they have definitive intended ways to break them, like mini puzzles, which is fine, but delaying and alternative strategies allow you for your approach to combat to feel more tactical and personal. Skills that delay enemy actions are super OP, but they're very fun and allow you to chain delays into delays. Either way, without difficulty increasing relics, it's usually not required that you master the mechanics, but whilst using Tactician's Metal and Dubious Dare, you will need to have a solid grasp to win, which I like. But I do wish the game had a difficulty setting that really forced you to make use of some of the more clever strategies like delay chaining. Regarding the design of the party, it's positive and negative. I like the fact that the party levels up as a whole instead of individually, as there are many RPGs where it feels very silly for levels to be separate. But other aspects of party design are subject to my criticism. For one, they tried to implement a bit of character customization, but it's near non-existent. You can choose a bonus stat to increase further after level up. This is only a small aspect of the level up and has very little impact. There's no customization regarding skills either. The highest amount of customization you get is with accessories that have funky effects, like choosing who to put the 4 MP restoration upon attacking item on. 2 accessory slots is nice too, but for armor it's pretty much always an objectively best choice for each party member at any given time. And then we arrive at my largest issue with the game, the low amount of introduction of new skills and party members throughout the game. You start with 2 skills on Zale and Billy each, and at the end of the game you have a grand total of 3. 4 if you include the ultimates. Okay, wait. I know this sounds trash, don't click off the video. I know this sounds really bad, but the number of options Sea of Stars gives you, including the large list of combo skills, makes this somewhat okay. Also, every player skill is a personal skill which really sets these characters apart, but nevertheless, in another typical RPG, you might have a list of 8 skills which get swapped around throughout the game, keeping things constantly fresh. But during my playthrough of Sea of Stars, I felt a certain sense of habituation. At certain points in the game, when it had been a while since the last new party member was introduced, I felt myself getting tired of using the same skills all the time. Around the time of the Sea of Nightmare, and particularly by the time of Dakari Village, this started to set in during my first playthrough. I think this could have been better if the active skill list was maybe doubled, with the inclusion of more skills outside of that active list that you could swap in and out. This would have really benefited the game, as it would keep players engaged with new things to try out in the combat. In resource management, Sea of Stars takes a unique approach. You can cook restorative items at campfires, which you'll need to use to survive until you get the next one. You have to think carefully about how you spend your limited ingredients to pick the best healing items. But also, instead of having a massive pile of random stuff in your pocket like in many RPGs, you're capped at holding only 10 of these, which of course encourages tighter decision making, whilst also making things cleaner. The way you use items isn't punished strictly on default difficulty. With my preferred relic settings, it's vital. You can't use items in combat, but due to how much HP and MP you'll expend during it, items will be a lifeline outside of combat to help you going between encounters. The resource management overall is quite engaging. Another aspect of gameplay involved in Sea of Stars is puzzling, which varies in its challenge throughout the game. Frequently in dungeons, puzzles are very simple and the next step in a puzzle is often pretty obvious. This doesn't really harm the game much as it's not taking much of your time, but occasionally there are some really quite intelligent puzzle designs. For example, the Solstice Shrines, which test your logic in a number of ways. But I think one key part of puzzles in the game which makes it engaging is the Mistral Bracelet, which allows you to use wind to push stuff around. There are many block pushing puzzles, which are usually pretty high quality, and on occasion, really creative. Sea of Stars offers some solid side content. It isn't the type of RPG to contain countless fetch quests or demands to kill X amount of Y enemy. The pieces of side content are mostly thought out, enjoyable experiences. There are many small secrets, puzzles, and challenges such as an endgame battle arena, which are tailored to enrich the battle experience as a whole. Though, for some reason, Sea of Stars forces you to do a few of the major side quests in order to get the true ending for no good reason. These side quests are still really fun, and I did all of them before I knew they were mandatory bar a few missing rainbow conches, but the idea of making side content unnecessarily forced for something main story related is a little cringe if you ask me.
Amazing!
Moving away from the gameplay, a lot of people highlight Sea of Stars' art style as one of its key aspects, which doesn't really feel right to me. It's not particularly standout in my opinion, and it might just be virtue of it being pixel art or nostalgia that hook people in this regard. Most of the characters and environments visual-wise are essentially what you'd expect from an indie RPG, but at least it's not Earthbound inspired. Though, it's still pretty solid at what it does, and there are a few parts where the visuals really shine. One of my favourites is the starting island, Evermist. The actual mist itself that coats the mountain trail adds depth to the visuals. Mooncradle also looks pretty great, particularly the celestial willow, which has this really nice glow. The whole sun-moon aesthetic / motif throughout the game helps to set it apart from other RPGs, and it shows in the visuals. Additionally, the game's world presents an archipelago of culturally diverse islands in the sea, which isn't exactly a groundbreaking idea, but allows the game to show off many different styles, and it's executed well here. The game also shows off its art style more by controlling what you see of it through its area design. For example, in this area in Autumn Hills, you have to climb up this cliff whilst the camera pans out showing the beautiful background. The combat animations are also generally pretty fluid, with a lot of the follow-ups to normal attacks being graceful, as well as showing off character personality in them. I also like the effect used when using life mana to boost, which is also used in cutscenes. It just gives each character a distinct glow. I already talked about the actual pixel art style you see in the game, and how the characters and such look, but the concepts for the main party character designs themselves are fantastic. They're all made visually distinct through the use of colour, and for the two protagonists, the sun/moon vibes shine here. One last note on the art style is that a very significant event occurs in the mid to late game, which is a huge spoiler, so I will discuss it in the story section. I initially didn't think much of the soundtrack of Sea of Stars, but as I progressed through the game, I came to realise that it has its fair share of bangers. One thing that made me oversee the hidden gems within the game's soundtrack was the battle theme, at least the day version. This is used throughout the entire game for normal encounters, and whilst it's maybe a little catchy, I don't have much to say about it. When it's night, you hear an alternate version of the track that's made better by virtue of its different instrumentation. I almost always prefer when games have their normal battle themes progress through a few clear stages throughout the game, like in Octopath Traveler or Fire Emblem Three Houses. Of Of course, the amount of work composers can do is limited, but I feel it could have been better allocated in a lot of RPGs. Having multiple stages of battle themes shows a sense of progression and stops any one theme from getting old. When the same battle theme is used in many different areas that are supposed to have distinct atmospheres, things start to get samey. But this is why Sea of Stars brings in one of the greatest assets to its soundtrack, which a lot more RPGs should do. There are some parts of the game where the area theme is not interrupted by the battle theme. The area themes are the best part of the soundtrack as a whole, as there are some real standout tracks. Glacial, Peak, Autumn Hills, and mooncradle are all incredible, both the day and night versions. The former do have such an energy to them that more area themes should have. The latter accentuates a feeling of homeliness that perfectly encapsulates what a starting town in an RPG can be like, and feels nostalgic later in the game. I also like Sea of Stars' main boss theme. As any RPG boss theme in the traditional sense should feel, it's invigorating. The mid-melody also switches between being really heavy and really light, cross phrases. At this point I am kind of just waffling because I don't know anything about music theory, but basically the boss theme is pretty good. Sea of Stars doesn't make frequent use of motifs, at least not clearly, which could have boosted the soundtrack's potential, but my favourite motif used is that of aephorul. It's otherworldly and incredibly threatening, perfectly presenting the authority wielded by the game's main antagonist. It's used in a dungeon later on and a certain endgame event, and it's very recognizable, reminding the player of the feeling that aephorul's first scene presents. All of this contributes to some pretty solid atmosphere throughout Sea of Stars. The atmosphere in some particular dungeons and areas such as the aforementioned Autumn Hills is stellar, accentuated by the ability to change the time of day to offer two different visual styles and soundtracks for these areas. The visual design of bosses combined with the boss theme makes for some great atmosphere too. Some of my favourite boss designs include the Elder Mist, the Chromatic Apparition, a particular skill used by Stormcaller, and the late game Medusa looking boss. You may notice that the physically larger bosses offer my favourite visual design and atmosphere. With more pixels to work with, some of these boss designs get quite complex and detailed, which is great to see. This last section contains spoilers for the entire game. You can skip to the conclusion now if you don't want to be spoiled. Sea of Stars has a great story, but it has some significant flaws that you have to push past to see that. One such flaw would be the protagonists, which offer about as much intrigue as a Fire Emblem Avatar character. They might not be silent, but they have the personality of a slice of white bread. Theo himself from Sabotage Studios has stated that Zale and Valia decry the tragedy of gifted children, who lose their inner voice and never fully develop a sense of identity because they are crushed by expectations, from a random message on Discord. But from playing the game, all I really saw were two people lacking in personality. From my perspective, the game doesn't allude much to the idea that being gifted and expectations are internally destroying these two. It's true that it makes sense that they're this uninteresting given their background, but I don't think the character concepts are explored well in the game's writing. Burdens and expectations of Solstice Warriors are discussed in the story, but Zale and Valia never go into detail about how these have affected them. They always seem eager to uphold their responsibilities as chosen protectors of the world from childbirth. A key example of how these characters seem underwhelming are their prophecies, given to them in the early game, which have barely any relevance to the story. Zale's prophecy of staring into the night is arguably sort of touched upon, but Valia undergoes the same thing as him in that regard, despite not having the prophecy. Valia's prophecy about opening Pathland water has no deeper meaning as far as I can tell. She literally just makes a bridge on some water when the party needs to progress at some point in the story. As a result, the two protagonists seem severely underexplored as characters. I'm not going to go into detail with actual character analyses of the supporting cast because I don't want to, and this is my video, but I will say they're mostly good, and I will highlight that the game does an excellent job of utilizing its supporting cast and having them all be relevant to the plot. I will skip over Roshan because he is obviously very central to the game's lore if you play the game, in a way that isn't worth me discussing either way. As for Gal, he helps set events into motion in the story, but his friendship with the protagonists is vital, particularly early on. Of course, when he eventually dies, I told you I would spoil the whole game, he takes center stage. The game's true ending is also essentially all about him. Sarai's significance to the plot is so immense that people have even gone so far as to call her the real protagonist of the game. She sets the party on their course to achieve everything that they do throughout the game, eventually resulting in crossing the Sea of Stars to save her home planet. This twist of what seemed like a minor character being instrumental to the game's story as a whole was a pleasant surprise, and Sarai's dedication to seeing her home world restored ties perfectly into what, to me, was the most standout and significant theme of the game's story: hope. And to portray everything in the story, Sea of Stars is one simple trick: the subversion of your expectations. The story in Sea of Stars is good because of how it surprises the player time and time again. Its own ideas and surprises carry the game's story and set it apart from other RPGs. And this is moving on from the character section and towards discussion of the plot. Before I get into the actual good of the plot, I should mention that the first 30% or so of the story kinda sucks. It mostly involves setting up character motivations, foreshadowing, and expectations to be subverted, which are necessary, but this is done slowly with little intrigue. The plot essentially just feels like the vehicle that is carrying around the main party for them to save towns and whatnot. The revelation that Alina and Brugaves are antagonists is a shocking moment in the plot, and the story's first big breakthrough. Sea of Stars builds up these two characters to be caring about Valir and Zale, and to paint an image of Moraine as a strict mentor that you'd expect to be the twist villain, a trope that Yolande also satirizes. Instead, Sea of Stars subverts your expectations by revealing that these two are followers of the Fleshmancer and associates of the Acolytes, which have been built up outside of the party's view as significant antagonists. This moment has build-up to it with the Acolyte scenes, but the form this build-up takes is certainly not what the player is expecting. Antagonists such as the Acolytes would be expected to have been heard about by the party and then they'd go on a mission to eventually confront these characters, but no, these antagonists, which we have only seen in dramatically ironic cutscenes, suddenly appear out of literal thin air to meet the party and turn the tides of the battle of Solstice Warriors versus Dwellers. Much like the party's expectations being subverted, the state of this conflict is flipped on its head as the core of what would have been the final Dweller is used to revive the Dweller of Strife, the same Dweller that killed over 20 Solstice Warriors, now returned and stronger to fight against only 2 remaining children of the Solstice. The state of this conflict changes from optimistic to bleak, and then Brisk is assaulted by the Fleshmancer's calamity. The Proscenium Brisk shows the player the ruin that has been caused, the immense loss of life and destruction of the town. The sun sets on the sky as well as the town, as it has surely met its end by this point, and it sets on the children of the Solstice, as there is clearly no return from this. Which, as you'll know if you've played the game, is completely false. Neither the Solstice Warriors nor the people of Brisk give up. They hold out hope, and it pays off. This is one way in which the game delivers its message of finding light in the darkness. Whilst I think the tonal shift is still a bit too fast, and Brisk was restored along with the creation of Mirth a tad too easily, this is still a solid part of the story. However, until later into the story, it seems odd that Brugaves and Alina would ally with the Acolytes. This changes when we get a flashback from Brugaves' point of view, which explains his and Alina's motivations more clearly. We see the pair wait in optimistic expectation of the return of Solstice Warriors, having defeated the Dweller of Strife, only to find that Moraine was the sole survivor. Being only children at this time, this traumatized the pair, who took a polar opposite outlook on life to Moraine. Despite watching and being a part of this crushing tragedy, Moraine perseveres. He holds out hope that someday a pair of Solstice Warriors will ascend as guardian gods and bring peace to the world. And it of course takes years more, but with the power of relentless hope it eventually happens. Moraine was right. On the other hand, Brugaves and Alina see this as a reason to completely abandon hope and run away from the problem. They see it as pointless to continue searching for true peace in such an unforgiving world, so they cast away the shackles of Solstice children and hide away under the wing of the Fleshmancer. The events of the plot, showing time and time again that enough hope is capable of performing miracles, shows that we should all be more like Moraine, more like the main party and less like Alina and Brugaves. Another surprising moment for me in the game's story occurs at the end of the Tower of Ansudlo. Throughout the game, the Archivist is presented as a narrator character who exists outside of the realm of the game's world. Needless to say, I was shocked when he suddenly appeared as the party opened a door, to find that they would meet the Archivist himself. This is a similar situation to the Acolytes, where the game shows something that the main party doesn't see, which the player is expecting to build to something, but surprises them by showing something else at a different time. At this point in the story, the cosmic and multi-dimensional spanning nature of the conflict is revealed, and a godlike alchemist who created the multiverse joins the party. This happens fairly suddenly and is very surprising and subverting of expectations, therefore I found it to be another great part of the story. And now we arrive at the part of the review where I talk about my favourite scene of the game. After the Dweller of Strife smashes the party down to the ground, despite all their efforts, all seems completely lost without the device magnifying damage towards the Dweller. And yet, Zale and Villia press on, another example of attempting to be hopeful in the darkest of times. But the main event of this scene is when the Sacred Pact is broken. Sarai snatches the Vial of Time and attacks the Dweller in Roshan's name. Just as Roshan gravely warned, this immediately prompts aephorul to step into the party's dimension. This happens very suddenly, and we finally get to see aephorul on screen for the first time. He is of course the main antagonist for the entire game, talked about constantly, yet unlike other major characters in the game, we don't get these dramatically ironic scenes in which he appears that foreshadow his appearance. This makes his debut all the more striking. When he appears, he immediately wields an air of immense authority and fear. His fantastic leitmotif is otherworldly and unsettling, as is his appearance as a sorcerer with odd alien appendages. His face is unseen, dehumanizing him and detaching him from emotions. Though of course, as we find out in the scene, he is a highly emotional being. The usual confident, smug tone of the acolytes is replaced by utmost loyalty to aephorul in the scene, implying his power over them. But all of this power and multi-reality spanning conflict centralized in this one area is reduced to something much more down-to-earth and human during the freeze part of the scene. Aephorul initially is confused about how Roshan has managed to stop time, thought to be impossible, which results in the two essentially nerding about alchemy together, and Aephorul even finishes Roshan's sentence for him. In this moment, they take a step back from the conflict and they simply talk as partners would. Aephorul calls his boyfriend the better artist. The mood of this scene really sets in when he simply asks Roshan, "So, how have you been?" An entirely human and friendly type of conversation. But this devolves into something implied to be a cyclical argument, something that's happened over and over in the past, to no avail. Despite having barely met him, we get a glimpse of understanding about aephorul when he storms towards Roshan, yelling, "And so is mine," appearing like he's crumbling in his portraits. We know from context that aephorul has suffered immensely over the eons that he's been alive, so for him to speak in such a violent manner to his partner hits quite significantly in this scene. As a result, I think the scene is really emotional and gripping, and overall the best scene in the game. The final scene I want to discuss, whilst I didn't like it quite as much as the aephorul scene, is definitely the most surprising in the game. The party finally crosses the Sea of Stars, the player having learnt the game's namesake, and for just a moment, the scene shifts from the 8-bit art style we've grown to know and love, into a stunning 3D render of this cosmic voyage. The drastic shift in style from this fantasy game turning into a space-traveling story has begun to set in by this point. But nothing is more astounding than something as fundamental and rock solid as the game's art style to change into something that doesn't even use the same number of dimensions. We'll cross a literal sea of stars as we see a beautiful galaxy in the Vespertine becomes more detailed and shoots out a projectile that shatters the fabric of space. Reality as a whole in this moment completely breaks down, and afterwards we're greeted by a massive stylistic shift into the dystopian future-esque high technology filled world that Sarai lives in. A massive surprise of the game, suddenly shifting in style for almost the entire remainder of the game, is one of the things that makes Sea of Stars truly special. By taking the art style of the game and making such a change to it, Sea of Stars shocked me in a way that most games are incapable of. So all in all, Sea of Stars is a game that surprised me. It pretends to be a game nostalgic for the retro age, whilst actually standing mostly on new ideas and pushing aside similarities to past titles to uphold its quality. Definitely a great RPG, currently at my top 20 games of all time. 8 out of 10, I rarely give 9s. Play the game, bye bye.